When you think of Switzerland, you think of the Alps, winter sports, a neutral and peaceful nation armed to the teeth, and a not-so-transparent banking system. But when it comes to cars, it gets quiet. Except for one company, Monteverdi. So welcome everyone to episode 84 of the Automotive History series, where we're going on an alpine adventure through the history, rise and fall and the wild cars made by Monteverdi. Meet the man behind it all, Peter Monteverdi. During his teen years in the 1950s, he was the definition of a boy racer. His father owned a car repair shop, and young Peter already built his first sports car at the age of 16. By his mid-20s, he built up quite a racing career through various alpine races, and even caught the attention of Enzo Ferrari, the big man behind the bright red Italian sports cars. After a few years, Peter Monteverdi was given the exclusive rights of importing and selling Ferraris in Switzerland, and became the youngest importer for Ferrari in the process. He turned his father's car garage into a luxury car importer for the Swiss market, selling Ferraris, as mentioned before, but also Bentleys, Lancias, and BMWs. Besides being a boy racer, the story goes that Peter was also somewhat of a hothead. So not exactly a great match if you have to work with that other hothead, Enzo Ferrari. Their partnership and agreement to the import rights lasted a few years until one day Enzo demanded Peter to pay up for a shipment of 100 Ferraris. A shouting match ensued and the business deal was cancelled. Peter then decided to pull a Lamborghini, and decided instead of following the whims of Enzo and its many stifling rules, he would build a better supercar himself. We really have to thank Enzo Ferrari for this, haven't we? If you think about it, this man was practically the inventor, or at least the cause of three amazing car brands: Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Monteverdi, and if you stretch his logic, the Ford GT40. Anywho, Peter Monteverdi was dead set on building his own exclusive sports car. As luck would have it, his own last name sounded exclusive enough. Monteverdi literally means green mountains. And so the new Swiss car company, Monteverdi, was born. The only thing left was to build a car. And this car was going to be an upgrade over the Ferraris. So more of a GT or Grand Tourer and less of a thoroughbred supercar. For the record, a GT is a type of car that pretty much excels at everything. They are fast, luxurious, comfortable, reliable, relatively easy to maintain, and very stylish. Peter perfectly understood the golden triangle of cars, the trias automobiles. Power comes from the Americans, style comes from the Italians, and the engineering comes from the Swiss. With the same precision they made their watches. Well, as it turns out, this triangle wasn't really a triangle, but more of an octagon. The power was no problem. The cars were powered by outsourced Chrysler engines. The almighty 7.2-liter 440 V8 found in the top-of-the-line muscle cars was the main power source, delivering 375 all-American horsepower. I say all-American as the European power ratings were always a bit lower, or more realistic. Optionally, the 7-liter 426 Hemi was also available, either mated to Chrysler's 3-speed torque-flight automatic transmission or a 4-speed manual if you really wanted to row your own gears. The design was also no problem. As a Swiss, you just hop over the mountains, travel down to the Italian Delta to find their motor city, Turin, and there you have a fine selection of coach builders. In this case, Frua was chosen. But the Swiss precision in engineering? That was tough. Switzerland didn't really have a national car industry for over 30 years at that point. Sure, there were other foreign car makers active with factories, but they didn't have an extra assembly line lying around to give away for free to some stranger with a big idea. Eventually, Monteverdi took it upon himself to design the chassis and use parts from various part bins of other car makers and companies. Also, Frua stepped in and said, "Don't worry, we'll take care of the production." The steel was from a Swiss steel plant, the front suspension from Elford and Elder, the rear axles from Salisbury, the brakes from Girling, and the steering from ZF. So all basic standard production stuff adding up to its reliability, but you did need to grab the owner's manual first to figure out what came from who in case something broke. And so finally, here it is, Monteverdi's very first car, the Monteverdi High Speed 375S from 1967. The 375 is a reference to the horsepower output. Peter originally intended to aim for the Geneva Car Show in early 1967. After all, it's a bit embarrassing that the Swiss were perfectly fine hosting an international car show without showing any genuine Swiss-made cars at this show. But that turned out to be a bit too early. Instead, the Frankfurt Auto Show in late 1967 was chosen. In later years, Monteverdi found themselves to be placed right across the Ferrari stand, like a big middle finger to the fallout of a few years prior. The high-speed 375 is a beautiful yet typical mid-60s European GT car. It has the typical looks, a fastback roof, thin window pillars, and of course a touch of Coke bottle styling. Although designed by Italians, I think it has a decidedly British look to it, especially because of the blunt chopped-off front end and the rather rectangular grille. You could park it next to similarly styled Jensens or Aston Martins. Critics will say that it kind of looks like a Maserati, which is no secret as Frua also did work for Maserati. Inside, you are greeted by an interior sledded with leather, a full set of gauges, switches and controls, and a nice fat and wide center console. And you could get all this and so much more for the modest sum of $28,000, or trade in 2 brand spanking new Aston Martin DB6s if you felt like it. The building process was also exclusive. Monteverdi would put together the chassis, engine and transmission at its own shop in Switzerland, then send the chassis over the mountains to Frua in Italy. They'd build a custom hand-built coachwork and interior on top of this chassis, finish the cars and send them back over the mountains again, ready to be sold at Pete's shop in Switzerland. After showing the cars on the Frankfurt Motor Show, they were praised for their beautiful design and impressive performance. Customers were lining up, and everything was just up and running before Peter ran into trouble. The legend goes that just because Peter was such a hothead, he now had a fallout with Frua and quit the partnership. But the real reason is that Peter liked to think big and wanted to ramp up production to 100 units per year. But Frua, who did the actual production, told Peter they couldn't make the cars that fast. These were hand-built after all. This, along with Frua's tendency to outsource some of the work to smaller and lesser coach builders with lower quality standards, ultimately led to Peter's conclusion to quit the partnership with Frua and look for a larger Italian coach builder. And he found one, Fissore. But here, Peter ran into another problem. He simply took the Frua design of the high-speed 375s, went to Fissore and told them, build this, but conveniently forgot to share this move with Frua. Frua caught wind of another rivaling coach builder building their designs, and as you can imagine, another shouting match as well as a lawsuit followed. In the meantime, it was decided the high-speed was a great GT, but it wouldn't hurt to offer a few different versions of it. The original was only a 2-seater after all, so by stretching and shortening the car here and there, various versions were created, including a 2+2, so with 2 miniature seats in the back, a convertible, but above all, a stretched version turned into a 4-door sedan. The high-speed 375-4 was something of a large sports sedan. Really, something of a hybrid between a full-size luxury car and a Grand Tourer, or sports car, something that wasn't really offered by anyone during the time. The closest thing would be a 4-door Maserati or a Performance Edition Mercedes S-Class. On the inside, you could practically get every conceivable option available during those days, including a minibar, a partition between the driver and the passenger, and even a TV. But these cars were all based on the one and only high-speed 375 Grand Tourer. What Monteverdi truly lacked was an exotic high-performance race car, so really a Swiss Ferrari or Lamborghini. And so plans were made to develop a real exotic car, which resulted in the 1970 Monteverdi High 450 SS. The name sounds exotic, but High is German for shark. This was one ridiculous machine. If you ever wondered what a Dodge Viper, the race car from the 1990s, would look like if it was made 20 years earlier, then take a good look at the High 450. It's a killer. Radical aerodynamic design for the time period. A 7-liter or 426 Hemi V8 from Chrysler mounted in the middle. 450 horsepower, which was pretty much the top end of the horsepower range, like what is about 1,000 horsepower these days. And that gets sent to the rear wheels that are tucked under a body that weighs 1,750 kilograms or 3,900 pounds. 0 to 100 kilometers or 60 miles an hour in less than 5 seconds, and top speeds over 300 kilometers an hour or 190 miles an hour. Shouldn't be impossible. Once again, everything seems to go swimmingly, but once again, Peter ran into some trouble. The oil crisis of 1973 broke out, which led to high fuel prices first and years of overall economic malaise second. Although you'd think that the type of buyer that bought such cars like the Monteverdis wasn't touched by the crisis at all, the truth is that many small-time supercar and GT builders went out of business, like Jensen and Monica. But even Aston Martin and Lamborghini had to do a little belt tightening. And so Monteverdi was also hit by the latest economic and other global developments. First of all, over in America, the car companies were severely hit by all kinds of new rules and regulations regarding emissions and fuel efficiency. The result was that power was down across the board, and since Monteverdi used Chrysler engines, they no longer could proudly proclaim the big horsepower numbers from a few years before, which was a big selling point to begin with. The cars became slower. On top of that, the high-speed, or medium-speed, model series also had to comply with the stricter safety regulations and other rules that almost seemed to change each year. Peter reacted by first scrapping the high supercar project. Unfortunately, it only remained a prototype as there was too little money to develop a car that would be a loss leader anyway. Peter was notorious for always being vague about production numbers, so it's not exactly clear how many were built, but most estimate no more than 5. But the bread and butter cars, the high-speed model series, was slowing down too. Even though the cars seemed great at first, some customers started to notice that Monteverdi was a car maker, but not a car company. It lacked that last 5%. Interiors were nice, but not as nice and tight as, let's say, a Rolls or a Mercedes. And the cars had a tendency to rust early. Especially if you looked at the price tag, you expected something that was a cut above these companies. Eventually, Peter decided that trying to build cars yourself from the ground up wasn't worth it. The high-speed model series would continue to be built until the mid-70s, but gained less attention and would eventually be discontinued. Instead, he found a new business idea. Peter decided to convert Monteverdi from car builder to specialty car maker, or so-called boutique car seller. Instead of building cars, he started to customize existing cars from other car brands. He became some sort of a Pimp My Ride deluxe. So not even a coach builder that only designs and provides bodywork, but really take an existing car, change a few bits and pieces on the exterior and interior, and call it a day. And from here, things take a weird and wild turn. His first rodeo was the Monteverdi Safari in 1976. This car was a reworked American International Harvester Scout, an SUV. Monteverdi still had a partnership with Fissore, so American Scouts were sent to Fissore, given a custom bodywork for a more European look, like less chrome and more black plastic, and were then sold through Monteverdi. The interior was also upgraded, which included features that were otherwise not available on the American Scout models. Engines were either the regular 5.6-liter V8 engine from International or 2 V8 engines from Chrysler, including the big and beautiful 7.2-liter 440 that was the cornerstone on previous Monteverdi cars. The Safari turned out to be a great success for Monteverdi, relatively speaking of course. Europe still had to get used to the concept of a luxury SUV, but the Middle East oil sheiks loved them. The Safari was quickly joined by a cheaper sister, the Sahara, exactly the same car, still based on the Scout, but now even less disguised and with lesser trim and options. The Safari is unique in the way it explored a market segment that was far too ahead of its time, the luxury SUV. Only 2 cars at the time seem to have entered this new market niche, which was the Jeep Grand Wagoneer from the mid-60s in America and the 1970 Range Rover in Europe. In fact, Monteverdi pushed the Sahara forward as somewhat of a Range Rover competitor, but it was certainly 20 to 30 years too early before the luxury segment truly started to take off in Europe. So in that regard, Peter was a visionaire. As mentioned before, in the meantime, the high-speed model series was discontinued, and Peter looked for a successor for the four-door GTs. But in order to make a successor worthy of the grandeur of its forefathers, you have to come up with something big and impressive. And you know what? America makes big and impressive cars. So, for his next project, Peter decided to customize a Cadillac Fleetwood Brougham, B. Lincoln Continental, or C. Chrysler New Yorker. I'll give you 5 seconds to think about it. If your answer was A, B, or C, you're wrong. It's D, a friggin' Plymouth Volare. Plymouth Volare. Of all the American cars you could have possibly choose from, you chose a friggin' Volare, one of the worst cars made by Chrysler in the 1970s. But besides that, the Volare fits into the story I've told many times before. What was considered a low-cost, mediocre-built, mid-sized or compact car by American standards was seen as somewhat of a large and impressive vehicle by European standards, if we talk about size at least. So the Plymouth Volare was sent over the mountains to Fissore, given a front-end and rear-end refresh, borrowing headlights from a Fiat and taillights from a Renault, and sent back over the mountains again to Monteverdi. Also, the interior was Europeanized, but the engine was kept, a lazy, detuned 5.2-liter 318 V8 from Chrysler. The car was then sold as the Monteverdi Sierra, and to be fair, they did a great job. You can hardly tell that underneath this is an American car. You'd fool me when you'd say that this was some sort of large Italian luxury car. In 1980, Chrysler ended the production of the Plymouth Volare, and so Peter was once again without a flagship model. Now he jumped to his next victim, Mercedes. The new Monteverdi Tiara was nothing more than a slightly reworked Mercedes S-Class. No, really. This time, only the front end and rear end was changed. On the front, you find the typical Monteverdi face with the dual round headlights and the rectangular grille, and on the back, you'd find taillights stolen off a Peugeot 505. The idea is that the car now looks more like a Rolls-Royce. Don't expect any changes in the interior other than a different logo on the steering wheel and extra accessories otherwise not available, like an in-car telephone, voice recorder, or TV. So there you go, a slightly changed Mercedes S-Class, and this sneaky son of a gun dared to ask double the price for it. But don't be worried, only 3 examples were built, and I hardly believe anyone was foolish enough to get ripped off. I hope you can see where this is going. By the early 80s, Monteverdi's empire was crumbling. After the discontinuation of the Swiss Mercedes, the Tiara, no new attempt was made to create a successor. In the meantime, the production of the American Scout was also stopped, and so naturally, the production of the Sahara and Safari SUVs was also cancelled. For a brief moment, Monteverdi switched to building 4-door conversions of the Range Rover as replacement under the license of Range Rover, but even that stopped after 2 years, when Range Rover decided to start building them themselves in-house. By the mid-80s, Peter saw all was good and had enough. Not that it was a bad business after all. He managed to become rich through the many automotive adventures, even after he stopped building cars. For instance, a few years after the Sierra, it was Ford that wanted to get the rights to the name for their upcoming car. They bought the rights from Peter, and he received a small amount per Ford Sierra sold. Since the Ford Sierra was an absolute hit, let's just say that every month a nice fat envelope fell on the Swiss doormat. By the start of the 1990s, Peter returned to the car-building game one last time by developing a spiritual successor of the stillborn High prototype from the 1970s. The Monteverdi High 650 F1 was going to take the racing scene by storm. But alas, it was the same story all over again, promising ideas, but too risky to actually go through with it. Peter, in the meantime, was getting too old for these automotive nonsense and decided to retire. He passed away in 1998, leaving the automotive history with another fun and interesting story, as well as putting a genuine Swiss car brand on the map for a few decades. If you wish to know more about the art of custom coach building, click the video in the top left. If you wish to know more about a rather confusing rebadged vehicle by GM, which also involved GM Swiss, click the video in the bottom left.